welcome to our session on crowding in innovation. I'm really excited for this one. The panel are definitely buzzing. We're going to be talking about innovation in government delivery and that constant need to join up our policy development with our operational delivery to meet the growing challenges. But how does that work in practice? That's where this bunch of experts come in. They're going to talk about and share insight from across the UK government and beyond on how we can build effective collaboration, including how to identify and develop the enabling infrastructure. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Joe Jolly, head of the Project Futures programme at the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. Noreen Heckmanzuk, who is the Senior Advisor to the Federal CIO in the USA. Murish O'Flynn, who is the Head of Border Ecosystems of Trust and Innovation in Cabinet Office. Paul Morrison, Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate at the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And Sanjan Sabharwal, who is the Head of Policy Innovation at Policy Lab. Now, I'm going to hand over to each member of our panel in turn. You can if you want, yeah. Who are going to sort of set out their stall for the session and how they see innovation working in government. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you so much, Am. I believe, oh yes, hang on, don't have a slide. Oh. That's okay, I can do it without the slide. So the topic that's my sort of reason for being at the moment and has been for the past 18 months is the policy document called Transforming Infrastructure Performance, or TIP. You can look it up on gov.uk, the TIP Roadmap to 2030. And the beauty of TIP, and the diagram I wanted to show you, is it talks about the system of systems. It talks about the built environment and the natural environment, and how every single project we deliver, actually, whether it's infrastructure or not, intervenes in those systems somehow, which are interconnected inextricably. And through that, we deliver services. So when we build a hospital, we deliver healthcare, schools, education. But above that, we're delivering against UK policy for levelling up, for net zero, for innovation, or we should be. But above that, in TIP, as the outcomes of projects are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So TIP, Transforming Infrastructure Performance, draws a direct line between the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the delivery of projects and programmes on the ground. And that in itself is an extraordinarily elegant and actually sophisticated model of operation. But actually within TIP itself, there's nothing profoundly new. It talks about digital and data, but it talks about how we use these things. So it talks about digital and data to collaborate better, to learn faster, to connect people. It talks about delivery models and commercial models that are fairer and more enduring and more effective. And fundamentally, it talks about changing how we think about value, social value, environmental value, economic value, how we measure it and how we reward and incentivize it. And the beauty, we are leading this implementation of TIP over this next year to get the core principles of TIP embedded as business as usual by 2025. And the thing I really want to get across, and we'll keep coming back to in this session, is that TIP lives by its own values. So it was designed collaboratively, it's being delivered collaboratively, but fundamentally, once it is embedded as a system, at its core is inclusivity, fairness, sustainability, and equality. And so it embeds a system whereby it does do exactly this, where we hear the people who are affected by what it is we're delivering, and we hear their voices in making sure that it's delivered well. So that's my mantra, and over to Noreen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. Noreen, over to you.
Hello.
No.
Can you hear me now? Ooh. I don't know if... Hello? There we go. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. I just want to thank you all for being here with us. It's 3 o'clock. This is a tough slot. So we really appreciate you joining us today. I thought what I would do, I guess I should introduce, I'm Noreen Heckmanzik. I work for the federal CIO. I'm her senior advisor. But I thought what I would do is share a little story about really getting ready to take this trip to be here with you today. And so I was at work, I was finalizing all of our materials, sending things to the printer, drove home quickly, and my daughters were kind enough to say, Mom, we'll drive you to Dulles Airport, to the airport. And so got in the car, made it out to Dulles Airport, which is just about 8 miles away from Arlington, Virginia, where I live. And so we're on the road, and I kissed them goodbye, said, be good, I'll see you in a week. And went into the airport, went through TSA, the Transportation Security Agency's security line, and then ended up getting on the plane. We had a safe taxiing and takeoff. We got into the air. We had a lovely meal. Tried to sleep a little bit. Got a couple of hours of sleep in, and then I entered, your airspace, and I got to Heathrow Airport. We diverted around some bumpy weather on the way in. And I breezed very seamlessly through your border force. Yes, border force. And then I jumped on the tube with my friend Jonathan, who's sitting right there. He was worried that I would not figure the tube out, but I've gotten much better this week. And then we ended up at Paddington Station, and Jonathan and I said, see you soon. We had some fun over the weekend touring around your lovely city, and I saw a Paddington shop where I bought Paddington Bear for my daughter, who's a huge fan. So why am I telling you that story? I'm telling you that story because there were thousands of people behind that simple, seamless, secure experience to get me from downtown DC to Arlington, Virginia, to Heathrow Airport, to my hotel, and eventually here to Excel. And I just really want to thank you. I want to thank the American federal workforce. I hold them in high regard. I've worked with them across 6 presidents. And these are the behind-the-scenes people who just do things that we never even think about, but we rely upon them so very much. And I want to thank your federal your workforce, your civil servants. And so, we have TSA and FAA. Food safety at USDA was my first job in government. My colleagues on that flight inspected that food that was on my tray table. In the UK, the people of NATS. Is anyone here from NATS? I can't even see. I'm told that that's your air traffic control. Is that right? NATS. And then the people of the Met Office, the Weather Service. No other people? I trust you're out there. I know you're out there. The Border Force. This is your team, the Border Force, who got me through customs, the Transport for London, your tube, and then there's one, Department of Transport, right? So think of all of those people that are behind the scenes doing what they do every day to just make us have better, more productive lives. And so I would just say these are hard jobs. We're kind of unknown, but we're so essential to our workforces. And these are, all of those examples I gave were really critical control points. If anything went wrong at any one of those stages, air traffic or the taxiing, right? Thankfully, we got in the air. The food was safe. I was not sick when I got here. And you all protected me. I really did mind the gap. Like, that worked. I minded the gap. So I just want to thank you all for doing what you do. I'm excited about this conversation today. And I can't wait to dig in to these issues with this team.
Thank you, Noreen. Just a little shout out for the comms community, because you'll have also seen the great campaign as you exited through Heathrow Airport. But no, really great points.
I'm sure, and I will just apologize in advance. I missed thousands of people. I would love to hear. Please tell me where I was wrong, because I would love to say.
No. I'm teasing, but no, it's such a great point, and I think something that we talk about all the time, which is that civil servants are involved in every element of people's interactions day in, day out, and we don't always celebrate that nearly enough. I'm going to hand over to Mauricio Flynn, who's going to tell us a bit more about the work that he does.
Thanks, Amrita. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I won't take any of the credit from Border Force, but I will say a little bit about how we work with them. I thought I'd say a little bit about my team and how we've worked with operational delivery colleagues and sort of about this subject. So my team is within the Borders Group in the Cabinet Office, and we're responsible for working with industry and government to embed sort of technology and data in our border processes, and basically to see how we can use that to improve them for businesses and citizens. I thought I'd talk about one of the projects we have been working on. So one of the sort of key aspects of the UK border strategy was something called the Ecosystem of Trust project. And this involved some pilots which we ran in 2022 and 2023 with industry. And the focus of these pilots was to see how we could get value from new data from industry and see what this could tell government about sort of goods coming into the country, where they've come from, how they've got there, whether they're safe. The design of these projects was sort of different depending on the pilot, but one of the examples which you might have heard of if you went to my colleague's presentation on it yesterday was a project that we ran with some businesses and shipping firms importing coffee beans from Kenya to the UK. And there were different technologies that we used to capture this new data, but one of the things we used in this was something called smart containers. So they tell you about the journey of the goods, where they've gone, what the conditions are like inside, whether the coffee beans have been kept in the right conditions. And in theory, that sounds really useful for people working at the border. It's useful for them to have more information, to have more data about the goods that are coming, to make their decisions, to see what poses the greatest risk, what should they stop, what should they let through. And on paper, that sounded great. But in practice, they had too much data. They got it all the time in formats that wasn't that accessible. They didn't have a way of questioning it. They couldn't feedback on it. They could get some information that they just didn't understand and couldn't do anything with. So what have we done with that? What did we learn from it? Well, the first really obvious thing we did was speak to those people and do what my team called user research sessions with the people on the ground who were working with that information, and also with our policy colleagues who had been involved in designing this project. What we took from those sessions was that actually, instead of just dumping all of this data on them all the time, we should work with them in advance and find out what the pertinent data is. What do they really need to see and at what time? So going back to our coffee example, instead of having all of the details about all the shipments, all of the time, all of the journeys, they might only need to see where a container has gone off the route that it was intended to go on. That might be interesting to them. They might not care about all the other shipments. The other thing we found out that was sort of missing in those pilots was the ability to provide feedback or question the information that they had. So to resolve that, my team's been working to develop a really simple bit of software, which we're actually trialing, I think as of today. It's just started at ports, so that our Border Force colleagues can feedback to industry to find out if something has gone wrong, why it's gone wrong. So again, looking at our coffee example, they might see that a container has moved off the route it was supposed to go on. They can just ask why. Industry can tell them, oh, it's because there was bad weather in the Netherlands and the ship got cancelled, rather than we're trying to avoid your customs duty. You might take a view on how much we trust that, but it's an additional bit of information that's helpful. So just going back to what we're sort of here to discuss, which is obviously involving our delivery colleagues in policymaking. I think the really important thing in borders policy or in infrastructure or whatever it is you're working on is just to involve those people who are using your service or delivering your service as you're developing it, and to give them the opportunity to tell you that actually what you thought would work hasn't worked and why it hasn't worked, and not to be afraid to start again and to learn from that. I think we heard from Sarah this morning about the sort of opportunity in building in incentives for people to try things and fail. And that's, I think, really important as long as we take stuff from it and we learn from it and we iterate. So I think something I'm really interested in getting into in this conversation. But back to you, Amrita.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marish. And I've got a great story about coffee transportation, which is not for now, but I'll tell you about it later. But really interesting points, I think, that has come up a number of times across the course of the 2 days, which is human-centered design, and making sure that you're not just creating a process that works for the end, but actually that you've involved all the right people all the way through that journey. And I think that is something, as you say, really interested to pull out in this conversation. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. So, yeah, I'm the Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate, which is an arm's length body of basically our housing department. And instantly, we were on your journey because we would have given excellent planning consent for a lot of the infrastructure advised around it. We do three things. We're an appellate body, we hear appeals, we advise on infrastructure, and we examine areas' local plans. My last job, I'm a career civil servant. I've always worked in the UK government. My last job was involved in the programme to bring refugees over from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mentioned those two because I'm going to draw on them in what I'm about to say, because what I want to talk about is a bit about the different kind of leadership I think we as public servants need if we're going to adopt the themes that we've just heard around how you deal with all this complexity and different entities and coming together in a different way. And just to give it a framing, a framework that you may have heard before that helps me and think about this is that there are complicated problems and there are complex problems. And by a complicated problem, I mean it's when there's lots of different moving parts, but you can kind of work out how to order them. We kind of know what to do. You can put them, it's really hard to do it, but you can do it. And then you're into really complex problems, and I don't want to go all geeky in systems about, you know, emergent qualities and all of these kind of things, but they're very, very complicated, and there's a lot, you don't know what the cause and effect is between different things. And there is really the need for two different kinds of leadership approach. So let me just illustrate that meaningfully. So where I am at the moment in the planning inspectorate, it's a really complicated thing we're asked to do. But broadly speaking, we kind of know what it's an organisation that's done it for 110 years. We kind of know how to bring the different actors together. It's very important to have user-centred design in that. We need to listen to our users, and as the title here suggests, that's where you want to go out and hear the users, and then you come back and wet towel around your head half the time and design it yourself. The Ukrainian situation was very different, and I would actually sort of reject the title of this session on that one, where it's not really about user-centered design, you know, insight informing us, but actually what we did was we had a situation where we had a huge desire amongst the British public to be able to support and give refuge and safety to Ukrainians. We had no infrastructure set up to do this. We had a concept which was based on something I'd previously been involved with, that members of the public could come forward and provide the accommodation for people. And the instinct of us in government, and the first was to kind of say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to build lots of systems between it and caseworking functions to match Ukrainians to others. Actually, what we did was different, and it really does talk about crowding innovation, in that we went and we just designed a very minimalist policy at the heart of it, which said if you're a Ukrainian and you've got a UK national who's going to sponsor you, and you're both not criminals, you can come. And it was very interesting to see that, because the leadership, which I'm talking about, and the behaviours that I had to adopt and my colleagues had to adopt, were in skills around building trust, trusting people to do stuff. What did we as the state have to do? We had to ensure safety. We had to build the data flows, because that was really important to ensuring safety, so local government knew what to do. But for me, it was like creating, every Monday morning, I got everyone in the room, NGOs and local government, and talking around it. But we didn't have a particular plan, because the complexity of the situation meant it didn't lend itself to us going, getting a lot of user insight, wet towel around our head and designing. So the reason I mention that, and I'm very happy to talk about it, I'll stop now. Just before I do, I want to give a plug, because I've become completely converted to this collaborative way of working in a complex environment. And I think we can all agree that, why is it important? Because there are complex problems that transcend sectors and organizations. What do we need to do? Well, we need to collaborate and build trust. The bit that's tricky is how, because it's really amorphous. So I've been working with an organization called the White Holland Industry Group and the Blavatnik School of Government on a playbook for collaboration. So I say it now, if you're interested, Google it. And also, if you're interested in having a chat with me about it, I'm on LinkedIn. That's enough.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. I think actually sort of linking to what Maurice was saying, really interesting the role of leadership in both giving permission for risk-taking, but also providing that trust and safety for not only the people who will be impacted by the delivery, but also those who are working on it as well. And I think there's a really interesting connection there. Sanjan, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you, Anissa. Hello, everyone. Yes, as everyone has said, thank you so much for sticking around. I'll give you a very brief introduction to who I am, and then I wanted to give a little story and then a little introduction to 3 methods that kind of connect to this question of how. We've talked a lot about the kind of big picture, philosophical, theoretical reasons why we need to connect design, delivery, and policy together. But actually, when it comes to how to do it, that can always feel like a really tricky thing to get into, and having the tools are really useful. So I'm the head of policy innovation at Policy Lab UK. It's an organization that's actually in its 10th year now, and our mission is right now to radically improve how policy is made through design, people-centered approaches, and obviously innovative approaches as well. The team's now 30 strong. It's really multidisciplinary, and I love it. I've been there for 7 years. And the story I wanted to tell you was actually on Friday last week. I was in a boardroom in DEFRA, and we had invited 35 cross-sector experts to come and advise us on how to be more resilient to a future where water might be really, really scarce. And it was fascinating because when we walked into the room, our commissioner said, "I'm really sorry, but you're not going to be able to break up that boardroom table. It's going to have to stay as it is." And I was surprised because beforehand we were assured that we could break this up, allow everyone to work in a more collaborative environment. And so I got on my hands and knees, looked under the table, worked out that that was completely not true, disconnected all the tables up, tripped over a few wires, but in the end made sure that the room, which was set up to be this very formal decision-making room, suddenly transformed into something very different. And the reason I wanted to share that was because the resistance to change is not just at the SDGs level. It's actually in the infrastructure that we sit in and we are at every day. The way you're all positioned right now is maybe changing the environment, the decision-making environment that you are in. So that's sort of one way in which we can start to think differently about change. It's the small things, not just the big ones. The second one was that when you bring people together to co-create, you're shifting the power dynamics from one which is very much an informing policy decisions, where then decisions are made by senior leaders, to a place where people are co-creating potentially solutions. Of course, you have to structure the framework and think about the challenge frame to make sure that you're managing expectations really, really well, because that's not easy to do. And actually, people are very terrified of having stakeholders who might have diverse, maybe conflicting opinions sat next to each other, trying to come up with ideas. And again, I had an experience of this with a DEFRA project where we're looking at sea bass fishers, people who like to recreationally fish. I don't know if any of you in the room, I now know a lot about sea bass fishing, and commercial fishers who, when you're looking at a common sea bass stock, have very different interests at heart. Someone big fish, someone small fish. When we got them in the room the last time, when I wasn't there, people were throwing chairs at each other. This time, because we created a structured conversation, because we had deliberative tools in place, because we were listening and building trust, that didn't happen. And in fact, we actually got people to find commonality and then work together to prioritize solutions for a regulatory framework. Why I tell you this one is because, again, we often fear what we do not know or are not comfortable with. And I hope that all of you can think about how you could maybe take those small steps to bring people together more. And that's what we like to do in Policy Lab. We like to bring that diverse perspective together. So quickly, 2 tools which might help with that. When you can't bring everyone in the same room together, one is collective intelligence. So this is a pioneering technology that is actually a free-to-use thing from America called Polis, pol.is. And it's essentially a bit like Twitter or a bit like Reddit, where people can upvote and downvote particular statements that people have put upon the platform. Now, this is really interesting because what you can do is seed statements, and these could be policy ideas or they could be positions around a challenge. And then you can get people to contribute to those, upvote them, downvote them. And what's interesting is you identify groups of people who have similar attitudes, and you also identify new ideas that maybe you hadn't come across before. And that's because you're inviting experts in the room or on this online platform, people with lived experience, people from departments, whether that's at local authority level, delivering services, or actually, really senior decision makers. So everyone on the same platform working together. They actually did this in Taiwan and thought about how you might regulate things like Uber, and actually made a decision using the platform itself. And then the final one is actually a more kind of traditional anthropological approach, which is ethnography. And what we've done in the lab over the last 10 years is done 30 projects where we've actually gone out to the people who can't actually physically come to the same room as you, or maybe just really don't want to, go and actually talk to them, follow them, understand their lives in their own context, and bring those insights back into the heart of decision-making. I did that on a project around enabling homeless people to actually vote, because often everything's connected to a physical address. And you can understand quite quickly the lived experience of how challenging that is when you have the video footage and you're sitting next to the Constitution Group minister at the time, seeing that video footage in his own office. So those are sort of 3 small snippets, small examples of how there are ways out there that you can bring that lived experience in, and hopefully you found that interesting and we can spark off some conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lynn. And yes, definitely interesting. And I'm going to follow up on Polis with you afterwards. I'm going to open up to questions from the floor. Does anyone have anything that they would like to ask our panel at this moment? Oh, yeah, we've got a question here at the front. Thank you.
Hello. Bit of an outsider to the British civil service, as I'm from Germany, but some innovation problems might be international. So if you crowd in and if you try to bring perspectives from the outside in, that also raises expectations in people. That sort of once they're heard, that what they say will then be policy in some way, and then if for realities that doesn't work, then some people might be disillusioned with that. So how do you factor that in? I mean, for some people it can be a very good experience to experience the policy process and realize why some of the things they would do if they were in charge wouldn't work, but for other people not. So just as a very broad question maybe.
Who would like to go first on that one? Yeah, go on. Go on, Rob.
Something we've had to deal with, and I think it links a little bit back to that sort of permission to fail idea, because if you're going to fail in some or a lot of the things you try, you have to sort of let people know that you're going to do that, so that you're not setting out on a certain path and saying, we're definitely going to do this and this is definitely the solution. But there's a bit of a balance, because you obviously need to get people committed to what you're doing, to trying it with you. So I think, I mean, it sounds really obvious, but I think just being honest about the approach you're taking and not trying to sell sort of testing things as doing them in the traditional monolithic, we're delivering this and this is the only way we're going to do it. But being open about the benefits if it does work and what you might learn from it, even if it doesn't work, I think is the best way to do it.
Yeah. Go on, Paul, and then.
So it's a bit, how you do it with the public or how you do it in any organisation is the same. The thing is that by having the engagement and having people say what they want, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. The worst thing you can do is have that engagement and then leave it at that, so it goes in a black box. So the really critical thing is that you have that onward feedback loop, and if you aren't going to act on something that someone has said is important, there needs to be an explanation. The thing I would say in my experience of doing it and creating those places of trust where you can engage in people, one of the real benefits is that everyone sees the complexity. Because before you're in a complex situation, it just seems, well, it's obvious, why don't you do this? And then when you're into it, you go, oh, well, I see, because that policy imperative competes with that policy imperative. So I think the transparency has to be there. You have to trust people, as grown-ups to engage with this and enable them with that. But that ultimate feedback loop, if it's just someone talking into a black hole, it's probably not worth doing.
100% couldn't agree more. Go on, Joe.
Yeah.
And I'd just say, the alternative is you don't engage with people and you don't ask them, and that is just always worse. It is so, yeah, it's difficult. Yes, you absolutely have to feedback and be honest, and that's difficult and it's painful. My sort of biggest direct experience with that is at the Environment Agency in flood risk management, and having to say to people, no, we're not going to maintain these flood defences anymore. Actually, it's no longer economically viable. That's a really, really tough message. But it's then working with people about how they can make their homes more resilient, how they can recover more quickly after a flood, and actually start to take people on a journey about, sorry, terrible, isn't it? But, what is possible and what isn't possible. And like you say, people do appreciate that. You can then make your own decisions, but just the alternative is not asking, and that's That's disastrous.
No, go on,
Can I
Maureen.
chime in just a little bit? So we have the power to communicate with our workforces through internal communications. And in America, we focus so much on communicating with Congress, communicating with the press, right? That's the sexy communication. But for the workforce, it's often, oh yeah, and we should have a town hall meeting, right? It's always at the bottom of the list, sadly. Well, you need that to be at the top of your list, right? You are ambassadors for your missions and for delivering for the people of the UK. So, and we say all the time, our people are our greatest resource. Well, we have to start showing them that they are. So I fought so many battles in many agencies that I've worked in to make sure we were communicating with our workforce even 15 minutes before we went to Capitol Hill to tell Congress, and before we went out with our press release. And when you start with your people first, you show them, you build trust, you show them they truly are your valuable resource and you matter. And I think, I'm getting toward the end of my federal career and I'm telling the truth. I'm just telling you all, I'm speaking honestly because I think these are lessons that I've learned and you can't be afraid to share them. But life is short. You're all here, I would hazard to guess, because you care about your missions. Right? Everyone in this audience has a mission that many, many millions of people are counting on for you to deliver better, cheaper, faster, smarter, right? And we talk in America about kitchen table issues. I don't know if you use that phrase here, families that sit around the table, and you're worried about how do you pay that next bill? How do you, send your child to uni? We say college, right? How do you, afford the next car? And so these are really hard decisions. And so I focus very much on the taxpayer dollar. We hear of billions of dollars that are spent. And everyone here, our job is to make sure, that's a precious amount of money for people. And so we have the capacity to make sure that we are driving that dollar, that pound, as far as it can go for the people that are counting on us.
No, 100%. You're absolutely speaking my language. I don't think I introduced myself at the start, which was an absolute oversight. But I am head of civil service communications and Cabinet Office internal communications, and that is absolutely something we talk about all the time. Is putting, we talk about, as you say, our people are our biggest asset. Civil servants are absolutely the reason why we're able to do what we do. And we should absolutely be telling them first. And my mantra is honesty, transparency, and authenticity. So be honest, tell the truth, build that trust, be really transparent. If something isn't going to work, say so. And if we've said we're going to do something and we're not going to do it, tell people. And then speaking with authenticity, so acknowledging that there is a problem or acknowledging that something has gone badly or acknowledging that something's gone really well, only goes to build that trust and allow us to actually deliver and deliver value for money in the long run. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, we've got one down here. I can't see past the lectern, I've realised, I don't know.
Hello, I'm Sophie. I'm in the Ministry of Justice, and my question's about culture difference between policy and operational workforces. We experience that quite acutely in Ministry of Justice. I think I'm in what's called HQ, which is the centre, and if you're in ops, you kind of hate HQ by default. Just an interesting example. What's the best way of tackling that, given that actually within the centre of departments there is quite a lot of careerism, self-interest, and there is actually quite a different culture in general of what you're working for? And I perceive that quite a lot working in the centre, that there is maybe a different motivation and the mistrust is not always totally misplaced. So if you have any thoughts on how best to deal with that, I'd be really interested.
Well, maybe I'll come in because I like to tell the story about myself, that I'm half an operational delivery professional and half a policy professional. And I actually spent the early part of my career as a policy professional, and then I thought of myself as an operational delivery professional, and I've begun to see the two. It's just an entirely useless distinction to make, because at the end of the day, I'm here to deliver a mission, and whether I characterize it as ops and policy, it's almost entirely artificial. And I would just share, because it's the end of the day, a frustration I get sometimes when I go off to events and I hear policy colleagues describing certain parts of government as delivery departments, and I always think, well, what are you then if you're not delivering for the taxpayer's pound? So the answer to the question is, I recognise what you say, it happens. the challenge I put to everyone in this room, if you regard yourself as a policy profession or operational delivery professional or finance professional, whichever profession you are, it's up to you how you decide to do the work. And the only way you're going to deliver for the citizen is if you don't allow that to become an artificial barrier. So it may be a behavior that you observe. It was talking about the leadership that you can adopt. You don't have to do it. And if you go for all of the things, and there's lots of collaborative tools that you've just heard, you can do it and get the right people in a room, and don't kind of hide behind the profession, because that's not a very useful way of delivering public service.
No, 100%. Sanjay, I know you want to come in.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, really, my own experience in the civil service is very warped because I came in as the first policy designer, which was neither kind of technically a policy advisor nor a delivery professional. And I think now there are about 100 plus of these policy designers in government who have both been sort of added on to the policy profession's sort of type characteristics of work, but also I think really do have that interest in delivery and more partnership and more collaboration. So first of all, I'd suggest really get involved in those communities, because they do span both delivery and policy, and I think design's a wonderful sort of philosophy and practice that does do that as well, because it sees things as end to end. And this is a movement, this is a small change. Now the policy profession standards actually include code creation, systems thinking, and being user-centered as part of the standards. That was not the case before 2021. So you're seeing the shift of attitudes happening. These things take time. Be patient and keep practicing what you believe to be the right way to do it, because that's the only way that the wider system will change. You need to lead by example.
Yeah.
God, Jay.
And did you say something as well about sort of like ego and different drivers, not just the policy delivery? Yeah. Do you have your mic with you still? No.
You can get the mic. It's coming.
Because I'm just conscious we haven't picked up on that, and I think it's really interesting.
I'm cautious repeating it because I don't want to cast judgment, but it's just my perception of what motivates people's career in policy is quite different from what motivates an operational, which is in policy people are gunning to the top. There's more senior roles. The whole kind of spans and layers is quite different. There's way more senior roles in policy. So I think that creates a different motivational system in my experience.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's about the policy delivery, I mean, I think those sort of issues exist. What motivates people, is different for different people, and those sort of things exist in all walks of life. I think the thing I'd really advocate is setting your own example, setting your own standard, and living by that. And actually, it does create. It is infectious. It does have an impact, and please don't ever underestimate the impact you can have by living your own standards and good values.
Noreen, did you want to?
I was just going to ask a question back, and because I'm not sure I'm understanding exactly, but are you saying that the policy people don't understand what it takes to deliver at the operational level?
I don't necessarily mean, well, I did kind of mean that as well. I think the point we were just saying there is that the structure of a policy profession, there's more senior high-paid roles. So people will be motivated to join that because they want to be senior, not because they want to deliver, because they really care. Potentially.
But I think they should be required. So that's what I mean. We have some of that in our country where at the White House, we have some people that have never worked in an agency, and I think that's actually on the negative side, right? Because you need... I've worked at 9 agencies. I've worked at forward-leaning agencies that are very well funded. I've worked at agencies much earlier in their journey. I've worked at science and innovation agencies. I've worked in regulatory health and safety, food safety, mine safety, very different from the National Science Foundation, like totally 180 degrees different. And I only think that I have the perspective that I have because I've moved across government, and I don't know if you're able to do that. I highly recommend rotations because it's so good for so many reasons, right? You learn, you will understand what will work, what won't work, and by the time, truly, policy-making officials should have to have mandatory rotations across the agencies that they are going to be writing the policy for, right? Because that will make them write the best policy and make them understand you can't just write policy and throw it over the fence to you, and you go, hey, thanks for that, I have no money, no people, it's never going to happen, right? And you're paid more than me. Right, is I think maybe what you're saying. So Yeah, I highly recommend the rotations, and we're struggling with that in our country too. I would love to see one day in our federal service have for our senior executives that they have a mandatory rotation.
I think there's something in there around also ensuring that diversity of thought and understanding, I guess, to a certain extent, your own privilege within a situation and how that impacts in the decision making and the policy making that sits alongside that. Really interesting question. Thank you. We've got another question from over here. We've got two questions. There's a lady. Oh, no. Yeah, gone. You got the bag, and then lady in the red next, please. Thank you.
Hello, Amber from DEFRA. Good segue with your thinking about diversity of thought. So I've got an example. The town where I live, there's a consultation about changes to the road infrastructure. Sounds exciting, but it will change the way that I have to walk my daughter to school. So I started talking to her about it, and she was really passionate about wanting to go and tell the people making this new policy about what she thought. We went to the consultation event, and clearly they're not set up for 7-year-olds to take part in consultations. There was no box for her to tick on the sort of demographics data to go, what do I do? It got me thinking about how can we think truly about diversity of thought in this and make sure that we do listen to all those different voices and be aware of those blind spots of people who, not just always the same people taking part and the same voices coming through. How do we encourage everybody to take part in coming up with new policies?
Thank you. I feel very strongly about political education, but that's a different different thing. Go on, Marish.
Can I answer that by sort of not answering it? The approach we took with our project was sort of different in that, like, the first phase of the pilot was really big. We tried to get it. We went through a whole expression of interest thing, got loads of big businesses interested, and it was great, but it was almost so big that it was too hard to manage and too hard to learn anything from. And we've almost gone the opposite way for the project we're working on now, where we've really focused on a couple of really small things and worked really closely with fewer people, but really let them sort of design the solution for us. We basically exist to help them come up with a solution. And as part of doing that, we sort of, I'm going to say hope, but it's a bit more than hope. We know that it will be useful for more than just the people we're working with, but we've really let people who are actually going to use it design it for us. So it doesn't really answer your question about how do we get everyone in, but it sort of, I hope, answers the question about sort of how do you get people's perspectives who things will be useful for to actually help you develop the policy.
Yeah, go on, Sandra.
Yeah. And just to add, I think it obviously depends on the particular policy area you're working on. But one experience we had was back in 2018 when there was the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And after that, there was a social housing green paper that needed to be produced. And our team went around the country and went to, I think we ended up engaging with 900 social housing residents about what they wanted out of social housing. Interestingly, one of the biggest issues was actually stigma around social housing and not fire safety. But beyond that, what was interesting was that even though we had supported people, even putting on transport and everything to get people to certain hubs, we were still not representing properly the demographics of people that were meant to be there. And so actually we then ran additional events because we captured some of that demographic information to understand, okay, we need to run events in the evenings so that, minority ethnic groups can be attending with who are representing their children as well. And then finally, I remember doing a workshop in my early days in the Department for Education where we were thinking about teacher leadership or something, and one of the stakeholders that would never put up on a post-it note was the pupils. And so we kind of have to constantly be asking those questions of, well, what about the people, who is the real end user of all of this? And that questioning has to happen in those rooms, but then enabling people to access the information through really clear communication, making sure that people can attend things, making sure that people have the financial support to attend things or the childcare arrangements. These are very, very practical things that we all need to think about.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't think every parent would always know what to do in that situation either, that isn't an option to take your child to speak. But Jo, you wanted to add something to that.
Well, just, you used the word blind spot, and there's a fantastic piece of research published recently by the Association for Project Management by Dr. Effie Constantinou, and she talks about how our ethics are the most dominant factor in decision making. And it's downloadable off the Association Project Management website. I'd really recommend, and you know, whilst and those ethics sit in our blind spots typically. Now, we can't not have biases and we can't not have blind spots, but we can be aware of them and we can put in place sort of balancing antidotes to them. And so I think it starts with awareness. And this is us, isn't it? We're the civil servants. We're the people designing, you know, there'll be a civil servant somewhere, presumably, or a public servant somewhere behind that consultation. You know, if we can all become more aware of this, then we will design better, more inclusive approaches that hear more voices.
I just had one quick thing. So how wonderful is it that your daughter cares about this issue, right? And one of the things that we are struggling with in the United States is how do you attract the next generation to come and serve our country when you can get paid more and have a take your dog to work day and free cappuccino bar at all of these companies, right? We don't do that in the federal government. And so I have some kind of probably unorthodox thoughts, and as you, Rita, as a communicator, you know, I might consider filming a testimonial of my daughter talking about why the road change is concerning to her walking to school, and tagging, using social media for good, right? And tagging the appropriate MPs. I'm going to get all of this wrong, I apologize in advance, but your elected officials, your departments and organizations, and just say, what is your daughter's name? I couldn't hear. Edie.
Evie.
Meet Edie from, I'm sorry, I can't.
Evie from Clevedon.
Evie from Clevedon.
Right, this is Edie from Clevedon.
We're already nationally famous for our strange road infrastructure. So.
I love Clevedon.
Right, but meet Edie and hear from her in her own words about why this change of the route will impact her walk to school. And I think that's an unbelievable power. It's a powerful story. We didn't get to storytelling and impact. That's another big thing. That's how it drives everything forward, is relating it to the constituent experience, was what we would call that in the United States. And I would encourage you to think about maybe doing that.
I'm just going to say one thing, which is I'm conscious the clock is ticking down, and I saw a number of hands, and I just want to make an offer. I won't be going anywhere at the end of this, and if anyone did want to come and have a conversation, then please do, because there's always so many questions and so little time. So I make that offer now, watching the clock.
I know the red numbers have started, which is something I've been ignoring over the course of the last 2 days. I think the microphone might have gone to where are you over there? Yeah.
Hi. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from the Department for Levelling Up. The part of the department that I work in, we talk a lot about how do we bring people into the room. A thing I often hear in response to that is the challenges around working with ministers, and sometimes the pace that can drive in how we develop policy and deliver services. And I don't think there is a tension there, but I think sometimes it's presented as such. And I agree with everything you've said. You know, we can't afford not to do this really when we're delivering public services. But I wondered, what are some? It is a concern or a refrain I hear from colleagues, and what are some of the practical ways that the panel have found to balance that need to work at pace, respond to kind of political direction quickly, with making sure we're bringing the public into the room and having those conversations? Paul, you must have seen it when you were delivering on Ukraine, for example.
Absolutely, we did. So very quickly, this question comes up all the time. And the first thing to say is, I love having politicians because that's democracy. And when I'm doing something, I need to know that there's democratic legitimacy of what I'm doing. And the way that I frame it is, I want to know politicians have set my why. What's the big picture thing that's the priority? I really want politicians to have set my what. So on that Homes for Ukraine example, I was in the room with Michael Gove, who's our communities secretary. So I knew I had that. I think where we sometimes fall down is that we tell ourselves we have to consult ministers on all of the how. And for me, that's our job. And you need to, there's a bit of a bravery around it, because sometimes you slightly hide behind there. Well, I can't do that. I can't talk to that person because I have to clear it up the chain. Most of the time you don't. You need to kind of have that discussion. So don't see it as an obstacle. I see it as an absolute prerequisite, but don't let it be an excuse, would be my one tip.
Yeah, I'm going to see if anyone else wants to jump in. Sandra?
Very quickly,
Yeah.
obviously it depends how long that quick pace thing is. I mean, I remember we got in, a ask from your department around how do we do 300,000 homes a year, and it was like, we need to know this in like a month or something, or even like 3 weeks. And so we very rapidly, this was in the middle of COVID, ran an online engagement over 2 or 3 days, bringing in all the experts and doing this all online. And it was an amazingly quick way to come generate a lot of ideas. Now, obviously, you understand some of the biggest challenges there, of course, but that was possible. I think it's about having the willingness to say, okay, we've got a time limit, what's the best we can possibly do? That was 0. How about that?
So, well done. We are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you all so much for attending, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. I think we heard some really, really interesting ideas on how we can collaborate better together. I've written a lot of notes, but the top 3 things I think I would say is that human-centered design and having both your end user and understanding who they are at the center of everything is super important. Creating a culture where your leadership is allowing you permission to take risks, again, sits at the center of that, and that building trust and safety. And then also, what have I written here? Co-creation is really important. So make sure you're thinking about how you're creating commonality across both teams within your departments and your organization, but also within broader society as well.